just zoom it out as well. Now, once again, to those new joiners, welcome to Friends of Figma September meetup. It's actually a virtual meetup, and this time we'll be actually talking about user research and how you can actually explore collaborative strategies to maximize various research impact as well. Now, before we begin, there's always some light introduction, and let's move ahead. Yes. And what is Friends of Figma, particularly also Friends of Figma Kuala Lumpur? So Friends of Figma is actually like a community initiative created by Figma itself. We don't work for Figma, but we get sometimes support from them from time to time as well. And if you have already attended a few of our past events, then you already know what we do. So there are various physical and virtual events that we held before. We invite speakers from around the world, within Malaysia as well, to actually share, for them to actually share their expertise to you around design or product in general. All right, now, of course, the FOFKL is not only me, it's not only me. There are actually a lot of people and who actually contributed to today's event itself. There's Gad, Marissa, Stan, Yamin, Chaiki, and Tracy as well. So they created this amazing virtual event for you guys. So thank you guys. So you can actually thank them as well. If you wanted to connect them, I think you can actually find them on LinkedIn. All right. Now, in terms of questions, be sure to actually post them on the YouTube. I'll actually take a look on them as well. So at the same time, if you actually have additional questions, still post it on YouTube chat as well. All right. Now, without further ado, I would like to actually invite Prudence. So Prudence is actually a senior UX researcher from Uber Amsterdam. So Prudence, if you're ready, you can actually turn on your cam anytime as well. All right, let's go. Right.
Hello.
Hi, Prudence.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh,
loud and clear.
Yeah, cool.
All right, now I'll pass the stage to you. I'll unshare the screen. You can actually share your screen, and I'll actually pass it to you.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Chi Sang. Let's see. How do I share my screen? Okay, cool. I believe you all can see my screen. Yes. Okay, I can see my own screen there. It's a slideshow. All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, or even morning, wherever you're based in this world. My name is Prudence, and I'm so happy to be here. Really grateful, and I really appreciate your effort as well to attend my talk about research, basically spending your Saturday night, if you're based in Asia, listening to me talk about research. It's a lot of effort. Could have been done, Saturday night could have been done spending time with some friends, going out to eat, or even watching Netflix. But you're here watching me talk about research. So yeah, I'll try to entertain you as much as possible. And even though it's about research, it still can be fun, right? So yeah, today, basically, there's a lot of jargons in my title, but essentially what I want to talk about is what are some other collaborative ways that you can work with researchers aside from executing research. So let's begin. Quick intro about myself. So my name is Prudence. You can call me Pru as well. I'm originally from Indonesia, Jakarta to be specific, quite close to KL. And I've been in the industry for the past 8 years as a designer and a researcher. So a bit of background, I actually come from a design background. I studied design in university. And then as soon as I graduate, I also became a designer for a few years. And then I decided to focus on research because I find my calling in this sort of profession. I enjoy it more than design. And I'm still doing it today. But as you can see over here, this is my Twitter bio. Feel free to follow me if you want. So I identify myself fully as a researcher, even though that's that's kind of like my title officially, but that's what I'm getting paid for. But I still keep the designer part in me as well. It's somewhere there within me. I don't want to completely neglect it and like get it over with. So I prefer to kind of like refer myself to as a researcher and a designer. I know it's kind of confusing sometimes. I even gone through like this like some sort of career existential crisis as well. My designer, my researcher, but I can be both. But for the most part of my career, it will stick to be it will stick as a researcher. So yeah, I am based in Amsterdam right now. It is very hot. It is 30 degrees outside, and I'm struggling to stay alive. I know it's quite interesting because we've gone through like this waves of heat wave in the past few days, and I sometimes I don't feel that I'm actually in Amsterdam. So yeah, some things that I'll be talking about today. So I'm going to start the topic with how stakeholders typically engage with UX research. This stems from my experience being a researcher in my previous company, being the only researcher in organizations where research function is not as mature, up till the point when research function is actually pretty mature. And then I'll move on to like some of the process that we established to streamline our workflow, given all of the problems that we identified and the learnings from the first part. And then I'll quickly walk through some of the research methods that we implement beyond user testing. And lastly, this is the main course. I'm going to talk about some of the UX research powers that you may not know we possess. And lastly, how to leverage some of these superpowers to really maximize your product impact. So before I begin, I'm actually curious about the audience over here. I want to throw a quick question because again, as a researcher, I can't help but asking questions, right? So today, how do you engage with your UX researchers if you're a designer, if you are a product owner, also how, and if you're a UX researcher yourself, how do you engage with your other stakeholders? If you can post your answer, I believe in the comments or anywhere, Okay, Tracy just told me that there's a lack of the responses, so it might be slow. Fair enough, but anyway, you can always continue your answers as I go through my talk. So this is a typical cycle of a UX research workflow. This is actually coming from organizations with typically with low UX research maturity. And this is based on my personal experience in my previous job, where I was the only UX researcher for a few months, trying to establish a report of the function and evangelizing and communicating the importance of doing research. But obviously the journey was not as smooth or as easy as I expected because it started with this. So let's start from the top, right? As a researcher, we get requests from stakeholders, being designers, PMs, or whoever the stakeholders are. They come to you and say, hey, can we run a usability testing, also known as UT, to compare whether user like design A or B? It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Sometimes it's mostly because designers and product couldn't really decide between the different options that they design, which one to actually proceed with, and they need research to help them decide which options to move forward with. And then afterwards, you're like, sure, okay, as a researcher, like, okay, sure, let's do it. What's the timeline? And then stakeholders will come in and say, can we have the results by tomorrow? There's no discussion in this, right? It's just, can we have it by tomorrow? Best case scenario, can we have it by next week? And then as a researcher, I'm like, okay, sure. How do I come up with all of these insights? How do I collect the users? How do I make sure that they do the test within a very short period? I have to be creative. So this is where we kind of struggle a little bit. Like, oh, okay, let's just do anything as best as we can to gather the data that the stakeholder needs in order to meet the timeline. And then once we get the data, after days of hard work, weeks of hard work, you manage to compile all of the data that you want to communicate back and share to the stakeholders and say, hey, design B is actually more preferred compared to design A. And then this vicious cycle kind of continues as well. After you finish one research, and another stakeholder will come in and say, hey, can we test design A and design B? Or like, hey, can we test like design A, B, C, D, E, F, G? And the options never ends, right? So yeah, as I say, it's a vicious cycle, which kind of leaves me with feeling, I can't help but feeling this. Again, I say we over here, but it's actually a very personal experience that I go through. So it's not a representation of the entire UXR population. So obviously I can't help but feeling like career identity crisis. Like I say, I started as a designer and I kind of fully transitioned as a researcher a few years ago. And then obviously when I transitioned, before I transitioned to research, I thought, oh, research is fun. You know, you get to like travel the world, you get to meet users in their original habitat, their home, observe them, talk to them, get a lot of insights, new insights, hopefully. Most of the time it is new insights. Discover a lot of things that you wouldn't know as a designer, right? But in reality, it seems like, oh, why am I doing user testing over and over again? And obviously, I can't help but feeling that identity crisis. Like, what did I sign up for? Is this all research? Is this all what researchers does? Is this my work purpose as a researcher? But yeah, obviously, my existential crisis did not stop there because we learn from our issues, we learn from our problems, we evaluate them, and establish a process to help us streamline our workflow, aka keep our sanity. Because obviously we cannot operate on an ad hoc basis. We cannot always have stakeholders come to us and say, hey, we need something done, we need research done next day, next week, and so on. There's only one of us, usually in most companies. There's one researcher who works alongside 10 designers, 10 PMs, if not even more. So there's only enough of us. And obviously, you need to share us with the other stakeholders and team members as well. So in order to keep our sanity, obviously, it's very important to establish a research planning process so that we know and we can anticipate what are the projects that we'll be working on within a specific period. It really depends on how your company is planning. At Uber, for example, we plan in a half-yearly basis, but in some companies that I know, you can also plan in a quarterly basis. So first of all, you can collect research requests from your stakeholders, this being usually PM and designers. And there are different ways to collect these research requests. You can do it through a more like proactive way. Maybe, you know, just have those conversations with stakeholders. And from those conversations, you realize like, oh, I think this area is worth exploring further in the next half or in the next period. I think we should really prioritize this. Or just some hallway conversations that we have with stakeholders, right, about things. It's pretty common right now that we're returning to the office. We'll have a lot of like hallway conversations, and that translates into a research item in the next period. It's very common. So you can take a more proactive approach. And on another hand, you can also take a more sort of like automated approach through distributing this, we call it intake form. It's basically a form to gather all of the requests that stakeholder wants from a research, like for example, what exactly they want to know of, and also what is the objective. And basically this form will provide us with a better context of what exactly stakeholder wants from this research. And then once you collected all of these requests from your hallway conversations, from your one-on-ones with some stakeholders, from this intake form and so on, you prioritize it based on some of the important criteria. And these important criteria can include like a product theme that, you know, like a product focus theme that they want to focus on in specific period. And if you feel like some of these items actually correspond to some of the key themes that the product team or product wants to focus on in specific quarter, then you can prioritize that higher than the ones that do not correspond to any of those key themes. That's one way of prioritizing that as well. But obviously there are different ways that you can explore. But I feel that's the best way of justifying the prioritization, especially when you want to report back to product, you need to speak their language. And then from all of these different like research questions, topics, and stuff like that, you can actually start to assign the methodology. When I say assign, it's not set in stone. You can guesstimate the methodology. Sometimes you can tell if it's going to be a foundational or an evaluative research. And obviously, when it comes to timeline, foundational research typically takes a longer time, like 8 weeks or even more. It really depends on the scope, while evaluative research is actually faster, a couple of weeks, if not less. And then obviously you come up with this plan. I usually use Google Sheets to compile all of the different requests, assign the priorities, assign the kind of high-level methodologies and the timeline. And again, this is not set in stone, right? Things will change. Things will always change. And that's the reality of our job. But then you still need to communicate back to the stakeholders saying, hey, these are all of the things that we want to work on in H2, H1, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and so on. So you give them assurance that we're actually considering their requests, their hallway the request being coming from hallway conversations, one-on-ones, and even this intake form. We're considering it. We have prioritized it. There's a way for us to justify the importance and the priority of these items, and we can talk about it as well. Because if we don't, they'll be asking like, why is this item rated higher compared to the other one? Why is this prioritized? Well, my item is not prioritized. So you can actually answer those questions, because if you don't, then there'll be a lot of like questions and confusion from the stakeholder side as well. So aside from usability testing that I shared in the previous slide, there are actually a lot of different methodologies that you can implement as a researcher, and you can mix and match all of them depending on their needs, depending on the needs and the objective. It's kind of like candy, pick and mix. You can pick like strawberry, you can pick different flavors. I don't know, banana flavored candy. Can't think of any flavors for now. But yeah, anyway, these are some of the common methodologies that we implement. Obviously, there's others as well in our UX research toolkit. So when it comes to generative, we usually have like interviews, survey, card sorting, diary study. Contextual inquiry is like it's user visit, and then we have focus group discussions, and evaluative usually is concept / usability testing or A/B testing. And like I say, you can actually mix and match all of these, and it's not always restricted to always implement one methodology for each research or each topics. Because sometimes from, let's say, 5 different research objective or research questions, you can't really answer it from one methodology. And you think like, oh, maybe this is better for a survey, and the other, like another group is better for user interviews. Then you can kind of combine the insights from both to further inform your insight, to be more confident with the outcome of the research itself. So that's basically kind of like the lay of the land of how research operates. And again, like I say, user testing is not all that we do. We do other things as well, more complex and more sophisticated stuff that maybe if you've worked with researchers in the past, you might be familiar with these processes. But if you haven't, just giving a heads up that all we do is not just user testing. But other than that, there are actually other things that we can do that is beyond research execution, right? We have other superpowers as well that we've acquired through conducting research, through basically having conversations with our users and collecting all of the insights over time. And these powers, these superpowers, you can definitely leverage to further inform your product or your design decision, or even a vision for the product itself. So some of the superpowers beyond execution that we actually possess are reading between the lines, insights triangulation, and we are the encyclopedia of users. I'll get into the details as we go. So when it comes to read between the lines, over here, I emphasize on behavioral pattern recognition. We do interviews, we talk to people, we talk to 5, 10, 12 people all at the same time. I mean, not at the same time, like different days, obviously, in different slots. So while we are interviewing them, while we are listening to their feedback and their quotes about things, we can't help but starting to kind of assign and judge. I wouldn't say, I mean, judging is a very strong word. Not so much judge, but like categorize and put them in buckets. Like, oh, I feel like these insights have been mentioned multiple times before. So we're already kind of formulating those insights in our head as we speak. And basically, this is kind of an illustration of how we look like when we're talking to people. We start kind of like clubbing, oh, I think this participant has a similar profile than participant number 2 and stuff like that. And maybe some of these insights from participant number 1 is actually similar to the insights from participant 5, 4, and so on. So there's a lot of like themes that you can start to identify by having these conversations. And again, we can't help but doing this because eventually that is our job, right? Eventually we need to kind of classify and identify some themes that emerge from these conversations. And I'm going to be super honest with you. I mean, as much as I hate it, but I still tend to do this in my personal life, in my day-to-day conversations with my friends, for example. Again, I can't help it, but still have this kind of mindset. And like in the back of my head, I start thinking about, oh yeah, I think this person's complaints is actually aligns with complaints from other friends and stuff like that. But then again, I can't help it. It's there. I guess it comes intuitively because we've been doing this for a while. And then next is insights triangulation. So in this case, it's connecting the dots from multiple sources. So our synthesis skills efficiently summarize rich qualitative data and connect the dots with other data sources. So we typically consume qualitative data, and they are rich. They're not like survey, they're not like quantitative data that you can actually convert into a pretty chart and then present it. It's not as easy as that. We need to read it, digest it, make sense of it, and then identify some emerging themes from this data and another data. So there's a lot of like mental bandwidth required to actually make sense of this data. But at the same time, what's interesting is that we possess this power of synthesis, basically making sense of a large pool of very rich qualitative data. So we're used to that. And then what's interesting is that you can actually connect these data points with other quantitative data that can make it more, that can strengthen the value of the data itself. Because sometimes you get a lot of questions about qualitative data. There's a lot of like concerns about how come you tell us what to do, or how come this insight is conclusive while only talking to like 10 people, 12 people. But if you back it up with behavioral analysis, if you back it up with analysis that you get from, let's say, our data science peer or our data analysis peer, and then you combine them together, if it validates what we found from our qualitative data, then you're scoring gold. But if you don't, again, it's not the end of the world. It's something that we can always discover or investigate further through a follow-up research. So here's a quick example of how I basically put in a lot of insights from different data sources. I'm not going to zoom into the details because it's confidential. But yeah, as you can see over here, I'm doing insights triangulation from different sources. I was doing benchmarking. I was doing interviews as well from over here, and then secondary research, looking back at the research that we did in the past to inform some of the research questions that the stakeholders wanted to know. To inform what are the answers that, what are the research questions that are already answered and what are not answered yet that requires further research. So my challenge over here is to make sense of all of these different data and come up with a conclusion with an insight that can be valuable to our stakeholder. This is my future problem. It's an ongoing project that I'm doing. But yeah, as you can see, this is the mess. It is fine. It looks very messy right now, but then eventually it'll be more structured and it will make sense. That's my job, to make sense of all of these mess. And then lastly, when it comes to encyclopedia of users, we conduct research. We talk to people. You are the user's advocate, right? We hear their stories all the time, their complaints, their pain points, stories about their children, their dogs, Sometimes it comes as a bonus point, which is fine, which is great. And this is stored somewhere, right? Typically, and we would document it in a presentation that we share with the team after research execution. However, and then we store it somewhere in the research repository. If your company has a research repository, then cool. If not, then probably somewhere in the deck. And then what's also interesting is that since we've done this research, right, we keep it somewhere in our brain. It's somewhere in the back of our brain. It's kind of like a library, right? If you can ask, if the questions are right, you can just come to us and say like, hey, do you have insights on XYZ? If the prompts are right, if the questions are right, we can always retrieve it back from the back part of our brain somewhere. But if not, then we'll probably remember some of the research that we've conducted before, or some research that we read that were done by other researchers in the past. So from all of those like superpowers beyond research execution, the next question is, how can you leverage our superpowers, you being designers or PMs, to really maximize the product impact? What can you do with all of these superpowers that researchers possess? So when it comes to reading between the lines, behavioral pattern recognition, and insights triangulation, aka connecting the dots from multiple sources. So this can especially be very helpful for conducting secondary research and context building. So sometimes, actually a lot of times, stakeholders will come to me and say like, hey, can we do interviews to uncover, to answer these like 5 different questions? And then there's a lot of times where I would think we already have answers to these questions. It lives somewhere in our repository, in the backlog of our past research. Why not utilize that first instead of like jumping straight to interviews? Because we don't want that to be a duplicated effort, right? Running research is takes a lot of effort, budget, and time. And if you already have the answers to these questions, why not leverage from past research, right? Like, why don't we just leverage that and find those answers from there? And also from data analysis, if there's some questions about like behaviors and like how user, like a churn rate or something like that, that is something that we can collaborate with our data analysts or data science team to extract those data. And then we can kind of like combine the two together, which can again inform the direction better, and sometimes also to inform the directions better in terms of like design or product direction and design directions better. And on top of that is also to solidify the research context. What I mean by solidifying research context is, let's say a PM comes to you and say, hey, can we investigate why users are churning from our product? And then if you say, sure, let's do an interview, you're kind of jumping the gun too fast right there. The best approach to do it is obviously leverage some of the data that we've acquired in the past to really build a strong foundation of the research strategy or the direction. We can look at what is the churn rate today. Is it really high or is it actually low? We can work with our data analysts to see what is the current churn rate within a specific period. We can look at the NPS surveys or CSAT surveys that a company has in place to see if there are any, what are the themes from pain points that you identify from those data. And from there, you can actually create a stronger case for running this research. From the analysis, you see like actually the churn rate is relatively low. It's not as high as what we think it is. However, a churn rate, like the churn rate between step 1 and step 2 is not that high. However, the churn rate between step 2 and 3 is actually very high. So we can, from those initial data analysis, we can conclude that maybe you should focus on step 2 to step 3, as the churn rate is much higher than step 1 to step 2. And we find this through the analysis. However, through the analysis, but if we just jump straight to like, oh, let's just do interview to investigate this churn rate, then you're not going to get insights into which areas that you should be focusing more within that entire churn rate. And next is the encyclopedia of user, and how can you actually leverage this? So include us when you're collaborating. Collaborate with us to brainstorm some solutions. So for example, product team wants to come up with some product solutions based on research, user problem and stuff like that. I'm like, cool, awesome. Talk to us. We can be the voice of reason from the user's perspective. We are users advocate. We know what they need. We know what their problems are. And we can help product to actually provide a direction on where this product's actually going based on some of the insights that we acquired. It's not going to be based on what the users want, because most of the time, if we ask them what they want a lot of things. But is that what they need? That's not necessarily the case. A quick example. So recently, I was working on a study to identify the need for mobile experience in the admin, for the admin part of the product. So I work in Uber for Business. So that's the corporate product for Uber, basically offering mobility and catering benefit for companies to offer mobility and catering benefits for their employees. So there are two parts of the experience there. There's the admin experience and there's the employee experience. And I focus more on the admin experience. And the goal over there was to understand and identify the need for a mobile experience for admins. And during the interview, we asked them whether they use mobile in their day-to-day operations. And they're like, no, I use desktop. I'm seated at my desk. Most of the time, I would spend using Uber for Business on my desk in the desktop. Like, do you use mobile? No, I never use mobile. Like, okay, cool. So they never actually use mobile. But when you ask them, what kind of mobile experience do you want? You're like, oh, I want an app. But in reality, they don't actually use mobile, but they want an app. So there's a disconnect between what the user actually needs and what the user actually wants. And this is pretty common in user interviews. And the idea is to make sure that we are providing the solution based on what the user needs, not necessarily what they want. And that's very important. So some of the collaboration models that you can actually implement based on some of these like superpowers that we acquire. So for read between the lines and insights triangulation is to identify problem space and opportunities. What it means is that when you are unsure about the problem size and whether or not it's worth solving, as a designer, circling back to the churn use case. So if you're not sure whether, churn is an issue, but you're not sure whether it's a big issue for a product, is it actually causing us a lot of loss, or is it not? Or which part exactly from this entire sort of like churn rate from the end-to-end product journey is flawed, right? So when you're definitely unsure about this problem size, and you don't know whether this problem is worth solving, just come to us and we'll just brainstorm together. We'll think about it together and see what kind of research we need to do further, what kind of questions that we can answer immediately through like past research, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of instances where recently I've onboarded a lot of PMs in my company and at Uber. And then I think in the past 1 year, I've onboarded a total of like 4 PMs. I have to kind of communicate to them what we do as a research team and stuff like that. And from all of these PMs, they keep asking the same questions, right? Like, like what is the admin's persona? And basically, we already have the answers to those information, but they want to do a research on that. And it's just a matter of like giving them the visibility of all of these research that we've done in the past, exposing them to that. And once they see that we actually have acquired all of these different insights from from past research, it will make them pretty impressed. Like, oh, I didn't know that you guys have already done a lot of research. Like, yes, we do have a lot of research. And I think moving forward, we can actually focus on other things that can improve the business, that can improve the user experience as well holistically. And then lastly, when it comes to encyclopedia of users, is to help product prioritize features and planning. Because sometimes product will have, let's say, a list of 10 different features, and then they don't know how to prioritize this. And obviously, when it comes to product prioritization, you need to keep the balance between business needs and user needs. And we can provide those priorities from user needs because we know which are the most severe issues that they experience, which issues are worth solving, because it is actually causing us to, the metrics are reduced, causing us some money, causing the users to churn. So we do understand the severity of these issues, and hence can advise product on which features that we really need to work on to improve the experience from our users, and subsequently for the business as well. And then lastly, to provide insights in a whim, there's a lot of instances where product or design, they want to come up with this like a demo deck, for example, like design wants to, if you want to present some designs, and obviously you need to start with the data, like the problem space, like this is the problem we solve from the users, and these are some solutions that we explored. And when it comes to the problem part of the deck itself, you can come to us and ask us like, hey, do you have any insights regarding such and such topics? And then again, we'll try to retrieve it from our backlog of data somewhere in our brain with the right questions and the right prompts. We'll find it for you. We know what's in store. It's just sometimes we need time to do that. But we can do it within a whim. It's not, we don't need to execute research. It's not another 8 weeks to talk to users and do like this very lengthy research just to answer one question. If we have those answers and our backlog, then we'll retrieve it for you. If we don't, then maybe that's an opportunity to do a follow-up research on this particular topic. So that's all for today. Some of the collaboration models and ways to actually work with us based on the superpowers that researchers possess. If you want, you can try it. See if it works. If it works, then great, awesome. I've tried some of this in my current practice as well. If it doesn't work, then I'm sorry. I might be selling a flawed model. But yeah, anyway, it's an experiment, right? If it doesn't work for you, then there's always ways to like reflect and find ways to improve it or maybe change it. But if it doesn't work, but you need to try it in order to know whether it works or not, because if you don't, then you never know. All right, that's all for today, everyone. I hope that you acquired some knowledge into how you can work better with your researchers in the future. If you're a designer or a PM, if you're a researcher, then maybe you can think of some of these different ways to engage with your stakeholders. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn and follow me on Twitter if you want. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Prudence. That was an awesome talk. I thought it would be longer. It was early. All right. Now, there are actually quite a few questions. Unfortunately, we can't see it from our point of view, but actually I've collected it from Slido's side. So we are actually using it Slido as well. So I'll ask the latest one, who is from Aliyah, and let's see. So I'll post it here. All right. Oh, luckily I can still write it and post it. All right. Now, this is the first question from Aliyah. She would love to hear about how you actually store or manage past insights. Like, are you able to share some format that works best for you or your team, and why?
Sure, this is a really good question, and yeah, I think I'd like to dedicate some of the time for like Q&A as well, because I think the Q&A will be more exciting. But yeah, to this question, how do I store or manage past insights? It's a very good question. Short answer, we do have some ways. Does it work? Is it the best format? I don't know. Like, I mean, it really depends. We have to kind of like repository. We manage two types of repository. We use this tool called Kaleidoscope. In my previous company, we used this tool called, I can't remember. I was actually part of the team that creates that repository. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, I'll let you know if it comes to mind. Something like Dovetail. Yeah, but it's not Dovetail, it's something else. And then, yeah, so we have Kaleidoscope, which is a repository for all of the research across the different teams that you can just search for whatever you want, who the researchers are, the topics, the insights, and stuff like that. And we also just have a normal Google Doc, and we just post like all of the different research we did, some of the high-level descriptions as well, the dates. So if there's any stakeholders but it's only specific to our team. So if there's any stakeholders who come to us and say, hey, do you have any research on personas? And we just redirect them to that Google Docs. It's more straightforward, and it's more helpful as well, because most of these questions I get from my internal stakeholders, not external stakeholders from different teams. So yeah, short answer is I don't know whether this method works best for me or not, for us or not, but it works so far.
Great. So I think it's still quite subjective to you as a researcher and your organization as well. So it really depends on how. It really depends on the things that you guys are doing at the end, and also.
Yeah. And I guess just to add on this as well, let's say if I share them this research repository of like 20 different research that we do, and like you just find what you want in there. And then sometimes they still get confused, obviously, because it's an info dump, right? And then the follow-up question will be, can you direct me to such and such topic, or maybe the specific part of the deck that covers this topic? I'm like, okay, sure, then I can do that for them. But obviously it takes a little bit more time because you're referring them to the specific part of the deck to answer that question, right? So that's one of the ways that I can help them to expedite the process, so they don't have to go through all of the decks one by one themselves.
Got it. So I hope that answered your question, Aliyah. So we'll move on to the next one. This one is actually quite a popular one, which is actually, so I think there is at least 4 people who actually ask the same questions or use this one. So how do we know if we are actually researchers that past research are still relevant, and whether or not we need to conduct new user research?
This is a good question. So first of all, you can look at the year when it was conducted. So if we say like it's 2018, obviously it's like very outdated. So that's one way of looking at it. And it's like pre-COVID, right? And things change after COVID. But what's interesting right now is that it seems like things are going back to normal after COVID. It's like COVID never happens in the middle. So I feel like some of the insights from, let's say, pre-COVID is actually can actually still be applicable to today's in today's world. If it includes sort of like mental model, if it's like decision making process, if it's like important factors that users usually consider when they do XYZ, I think that's pretty standardized. They don't change a lot, and obviously the difference is during COVID and pre or post COVID, those considerations might change. So just keeping in mind like some of these external issues or external external situations that impact the user's behavior. But overall, I think when it comes to like mental model or decision-making process, important factors, pain points in general, not related to the product itself, I think they can still be relevant. But things that are not relevant are usually tied to like the product usage, right? Let's say when we're evaluating a design at that point, like a latest iteration or something, obviously it will be different to what it is today. Obviously, they've gone through like series of different iterations and probably test that over time as well. So those insights will no longer be relevant to what it is today. Some of the pain points that we identified from how the users use our product, obviously it's not relevant to what it is today because we've made those iterations, right?
Got it. Actually, yeah, this is actually a pretty good answer to a lot of people's question as well. But I also wanted to add, most probably it might also be depending on the industry. Would that be true as well?
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah, industry is an important one. Like for example, in like Uber for Business, obviously we really considered like the different behaviors pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. They're kind of different in a way that pre-COVID, most of the companies were fully at the office, And then during COVID, most of them went remote, right? And obviously over there, the behavior is completely different. And post COVID, now we're slowly shifting to like hybrid model. I think it started with like fully remote still for first few years, I think, and or at least until the beginning of this year, if I'm not mistaken. And then you're suddenly moving to a hybrid model right now, and then that is where things start to get different. I think just being aware of like what is what are the updates in your industries that you're currently working on. If in my case it's basically like corporates, what are the latest like work from home policy, for example, or just the current situation that will kind of inform what is the lay of the land that you're dealing with right now.
I see. Got it. Got it. So I hope that answers a lot of people's questions. So this is one of the popular ones. Let's move on to I think we still have like I think maybe three. So that's good. We can actually use that. All
Sounds
right.
good.
Another one would be hi Pru. I believe that ways of communicating research results are also it also plays a big part in maximizing its impact itself. Do you have any tips on how to actually kind of optimize it?
Yeah, this is pretty valid. Obviously, communicating research result. It's very important as part of the to make sure that our research are implemented by the product team. How to optimize it is still a work in progress from my side. Obviously, usually when we report research, it'll come in a deck and we present it to the team, and we'll always have discussions after the presentation on how can we use these insights to make product improvements or just come up with some high level product strategies or things that we still need to um, investigate further. But in terms of maximizing, I think just having those sort of like follow up conversations with the with the main stakeholders after the share out or after the research presentation to really make sure that these are the things that they will be considering. And then if they're implementing these things, then check back with them in the next few months. What is the impact of these insights or the solution that were based off these insights on our product, right? On our product metrics. Um, I think that's the best answer that I can give right now. But obviously, it's a matter of just like screen time with your stakeholders. And I mean, it's great if, let's say, you are actually located in the same office or same location with them. You can always utilize those hallway conversations to sell your insights, right? But if you're not, then I guess it's a little bit more tricky. Just have to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but more like mindful about the things and the insights that you communicate to your stakeholders. You can always refer some of the conversations to your research and stuff like that. Yeah, so I guess in short, I'm not a strong believer of being aggressive in communicating research insights. I like to influence them subtly, like through these like one-on-one conversations or like team meetings, like, hey, there's this I found that answer somewhere in my research. You can refer back to this, and then this can inform your product direction and stuff like that. So it's kind of influencing them in those like mini touch points in your day-to-day conversation or your one-on-ones and stuff like that.
All right. But is there a reason why you do it subtly instead of quite formal occasion that hey, this is one and two that I found out?
Because they'll forget
See,
after
I
the
see.
presentation, like, cool, awesome, info dumb. This is a typical kind of like reaction that stakeholders get after a research share out. They'll need to digest all of this like insights about the users, and then they're like, what do I do with this? There's so much information, and then they'll probably just forget about it. And then in your day-to-day conversation, it's just a matter of kind of pulling them back into like, hey, remember from that presentation, like I told you XYZ, dude, any plans to like implement it or whatever? And they're like, oh yeah, that's true. Just kind of reminding them, because obviously
I
they'll
see.
forget. They're busy people, they have a lot of things on their plate, and obviously you're not the only one in their mind.
I see. So it really so there is always the formal presentation there, but
Yeah.
it I think as a researcher, as a good responsible researcher, you kind of remind them occasionally as well after that.
Yeah, there's more like informal ways of advertising your insights in those, mini meetings and yeah, like informal conversations that you have with them.
All right, cool. Wow, you guys are actually asking a lot of questions almost at the end. I need to select. All right, all right. We have another one. Is that in your presentation you mentioned about prioritizing research requests based on criteria? Can you explain what are those criteria look like?
Sure. So the way we prioritize it is one of the criteria that I mentioned is like, let's say if product has some sort of like a direction they want to focus on or a theme they want to focus on in specific half or specific year or specific period. Usually they will have this deck. I don't know, like at Uber, we have this deck, basically highlights all of the key focus areas in H1, H2. These are the metrics that we want to impact. And that is very clear for us because any research request that aligns with any of those like key themes and key metrics that we want to impact can be rated or prioritized higher than the ones that don't. But if you don't have those kind of like artifacts or documentation, maybe it's worth asking your like product leads. Usually they'll have it. I'm quite sure like most of tech companies, they will have some sort of like source of truth or direction that they want to achieve in certain half, or maybe you're even part of that conversation, which makes it even better. And you can always map it based on that. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way is like effort as well. If, like I said in the presentation, if it's like a foundational research, and obviously it takes a longer time. And usually foundational research are prioritized higher because it's a strategic type of research and it gives us the most impact. And obviously that's what we love as researchers. Like we want to influence product in a more strategic level rather than doing usability testing over and over again. So in that case, we will prioritize it higher as compared to like one-off usability testing to test between design A and design B, which obviously designers can do themselves, and we can act as an advisor to the designer. So it doesn't require our full support in that piece. So yeah, it's a combination of different things because in the future, if let's say product team comes to you like, hey, why is my research not prioritized? Why is his research prioritized? You're like, oh yeah, it aligns with the product metrics. It aligns with the theme. It's beyond my control. You can see like the direct mapping of how this aligns with this one, with the, like the key themes that's been established for leadership. And they're like, okay, cool.
I see. So it's the strategy stuff that as of now, it's actually more important than those like, for example, UTs, which is, as you said, can be done by even UI designers if they wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say like maybe one of the key areas that the company wants to achieve this half or this period is reducing churn, and that's documented somewhere in the product presentation. And then any initiative or any research topics that aligns with how can we reduce churn will be prioritized higher than the ones that do not immediately affect that.
I see. So, well, following up on that, on this particular question, we have another one, which is actually, let me just quickly create it. It's actually, how do you measure the impact of research?
Oh, this is work in progress. So there's different ways of measuring impact. One is through the metrics itself, product metrics. So let's say if there's some solutions that were implemented based on the research insights, that's pretty straightforward. Like, oh, this solution is based on the research insights, and then let's check back with the team in the next couple of months if the needle has moved, right? If it's if we're actually achieving the metrics that we want. If, let's say, going back to the examples of churn, if we're actually reducing churn through our recommendations, then amazing, cool, our methodology works, our insights are helpful. So that's one way. But if it doesn't, then it's not the end of the world, obviously. Maybe there's something, incompatible, like maybe the method that we implement is not conclusive enough. Maybe we should be approaching the research in a different way in the future. So we can always come back to the drawing board, evaluate it, and think about maybe there's a better strategy to kind of measure it and approach the problem in the future to be more accurate. So that's one way. Another way of measuring the impact is oftentimes product or designers, they come with a very strong I wouldn't say opinion, like very strong assumption that this solution would work. They come to you and say, hey, I have this solution. I'm sure it's going to work. Can you test whether it's going to work or not? And we're like, dude, we don't even know the problem yet. Like, what is the solution based on, like, let's just look at the problem space first. And then let's see if the solution that actually works would actually work or not for the users. And then if it turns out that it doesn't, if it turns out that it's not a problem at all, and then you can push back from this research and say, we should not build this product because users don't need it. We don't see the need for users in the future to use this product. And also, it will definitely reduce a lot of engineering and development effort and budget, right? Like, you don't waste money for building products that users won't use. And that's
True.
another way of measuring impact. You're helping the company save costs by not building the product that users won't use.
Yeah.
So that's two ways that I can think of.
Yep. I think it's also how you kind of phrase it in a way to different stakeholders as well, which is kind of like a challenge and also one of the most important things, because I think a lot of us are, well, I'm assuming, so it's not research backed, but a lot of us are actually sole designers, as far as I can actually see as of now. And one of the challenges I think a lot of sole designers face is actually advocating for user research. And sometimes founders be like, I think this feature might make sense. And then you can't argue because, again, you have no data and
Yes.
you can't argue with your aspirations. So not one way is to actually cost as well, because founders actually care. Besides profit, it's also how much they will burn in a month. So
Yeah. And I mean, I've worked at startups before. I've been a sole designer / researcher / brand / marketing / social media designer in the past. So I've been in your position, and I think the biggest challenge is to advocate like the importance of doing foundational research to understand if this is actually the problem that people are going through. Because oftentimes they'll be like, can we just build it, test it, and see how it works, whether it works or not? If it doesn't, let's build another iteration and test it back again. I mean, that's not wrong. That's also doable.
yeah.
But it shifts us away from really understanding the problem space, right? Like, if we understand the problem space, if we know that these problems exist, then we can always recommend different solutions to resolve that issue and take a more iterative approach moving forward. If we know how the user thinks, if we know basically like their mental model, their mindset and stuff like that, then we can always like build something or build a product that can, solve their problem, that can be to their liking and meet their needs. And I think that's the most essential part. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort. But I think the insights can be very rewarding for the future.
Yep. And I think this is actually another topic on itself, and whether to test it or not. So we might have that in the future, having a founder who is actually iterate fast enough to change it. Now, we have one more question. I actually wanted to ask this one more question, which is actually AI related, since it's a buzzword these days.
Okay.
As a researcher, what are the challenges that you feel AI might help?
In my day-to-day execution, or in what way? Or in terms of the product itself?
Maybe day-to-day execution. I'm actually just helping you to ask if whoever's asking this. It's anonymous.
I hope so. I think it helps me to form my thoughts better. because sometimes, let's say if I'm writing a research context and stuff like that, I have a lot of like different data points that I can't really connect in a nice language or nice paragraph. Like I have, let's say, like 3 points that I would include in a research context and stuff like that. But I don't know how to wave it in a way that it's like it sounds nice. It sounds like um, appealing and like dramatic enough. So yeah, run it by Chat GPT, and it's just gonna give you like a fully formed sentence. I'm not asking Chat GPT to write a research brief, but obviously the insights that you get from that, it's not always great. There's a lot of
Yep.
like edits that you still need to do, obviously, to fit your needs. But I feel like in just sort of like day-to-day documentation, writing some, I don't know, chat that does not involve any datas. You can kind of run it through ChatGPT, I guess, because obviously some of the data that we have are very confidential, and we don't want to kind of expose that anywhere.
Got it.
So that's one way I think about ChatGPT.
Is there any
What
other tools
else?
besides ChatGPT that you've tried before?
I don't know. I haven't really explored AI that much. I know those like, image generation,
I see.
AI. But yeah, in your opinion, what other AI tools or
Well, in terms of research, same
parts of
for
AI?
ChatGPT as well. Yeah. Well, in terms of research, yeah, it's still ChatGPT. I think I agree with you as well. If you're actually, maybe it's more like spelling and how to write insights, you can actually check it, but not like compile, not like analyzing the.
Oh
You're not,
no,
you're not like throwing all the raw data and then tell ChatGPT to summarize. I don't think that's recommended at all.
obviously
So
not. No.
yeah, so
So
if you're
sometimes you
junior,
like,
don't try.
yeah, or like sometimes you don't know how to, you come up with themes, right? You find some patterns, and you're like, oh yeah, I think these, behavior insights that you get from 5 different users make sense, and I name it as such, but it doesn't sound compelling enough. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not self-explanatory, and then sometimes I would either like bounce this idea with my peers, like, this. Do you think this makes sense? It's like, oh, maybe this is a better word for it, and then maybe let's check ChatGPT, like, what is the best word to
Yeah.
describe
I think
XYZ?
that's actually the best one, the best use cases for us, coming out with a word based on different voice and tone. But if you're actually interested in researching, don't try to compile your raw data with ChatGPT.
No, you don't want to
I
give them
tried
data.
before; it looks really weird. Yeah, and yeah, I think that's all the questions. Actually, that's all the questions for the day.
Oh wow.
Yep. Actually, there's just a lot more, but I'm running out of time. Still have 10 minutes, but I'll end it right here for the questions. Once again, thanks Prudence for your awesome talk as well.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for inviting
I'll
me.
Yeah, I'll actually just send you off stage virtually. Cool. All right, that's done. And before we leave, there are still a few stuff left. Let me quickly dive in back. Right, again, don't miss our next events and updates as well. And if you have taken some screenshots today, which is a very good thing, be sure to share them on various social media, Twitter, Instagram. We are actually most active on Instagram, and also LinkedIn. So just find us as Elias FOF_Kuala Lumpur. You can actually find us everywhere as well: LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and also Facebook. So be sure to tag us as well. And once again, feedback, if you have not already, I've already shown the feedback in the banner. And also, if you wanted to take the feedback from your phone as well, you can do it literally right now. And we have already done that. And once again, thank you. And I hope to see you next time. Hopefully, the next one, which is in Q4, will be physical. We'll announce soon. So that's about it. And I'll see you guys very soon. Bye.